Thank you very much for having me today. My name is Remi Desa. I'm with a company called Pantonium, and what we do is we're really focused on helping improve public transit and helping cities really reimagine the way people move around them through an on-demand model. So when we look on these two pictures, the picture on the left and the picture on the right, I think the picture on the left is what most of us are used to when we see cities, especially in North America. How people commute is usually in cars. The picture on the right is where our goal is. Our goal is to get more people to share their commutes and moving travel in buses because we think buses are great tools for cities. They can really help improve the quality of life in cities. But to help that, to help improve public transit, which is very important for cities, we have to make public transit more accessible and convenient for the people who use public transit, the riders, and also more flexible and productive for the transit agencies. And if we're able to do this, we can deliver enhanced social, environmental, and economic outcomes for the cities by allowing the cities to do a lot more with less. So when we look at public transit, specifically bus public transit, the challenge faced is usually comes around two factors. Density, so we're in downtown Toronto, but as soon as we leave the city core, there's areas which are less dense. So how do you cover those dense and less dense areas? And demand changes at different times of the day. In the morning, you have commuters who are going to work, so you have your peak demand. In midday, you have people who are going for shift work. In the evening, people are going to different places. So demand and density is constantly changing. Now, the way traditionally public transit bus services are designed is cities will usually work with consultants who run surveys of where they think people need to go. And based on that, they design the routes because generally in cities, they have a fixed budget of how many buses they can allocate. And then they have to decide how to position these buses in the cities based on routes, namely on two factors. They want to ensure that they cover their entire city, but as well, they want to also make sure they cover the areas where it's the higher density, where there's chance of more people using public transit. So from these surveys, a lot of times the results of it is usually very good bus designs and route networks that are designed well to bring people to the center of the city. So if you look at most bus routes across North America and the transit systems, they're usually star-shaped systems, which have a hub in the center, and they bring people to the center of the city. Now that works really good if people are coming to the center of the city, but the challenge nowadays is most people are actually going across the city. So what happens is when people have to travel across the city, they have to take one or two buses, they have to transfer a number of times, and it becomes very inconvenient. So sometimes to drive, which could take you 15, 20 minutes, to go by transit can take you an hour to an hour and a half with all the different transfers that you have to take. And the result is a lot of times people choose not to use public transit because they value their time more, and they don't want to spend that much time on public transit. And a result of this too is you see a lot of empty buses, especially in these areas where they're not so dense and in the less dense areas or at different times of the day. And COVID's really exacerbated this. So we believe buses are actually one of the best tools to move many people at one time. Buses are not tied to tracks. They don't have the high infrastructure costs as trains or rails, and they can be flexible when they're on the road. So what our technology is doing, in essence, is we are taking these buses and routing them between bus stops. So keeping the aspect of public transit, which we believe works well, which is large vehicles and going to bus stops, but getting rid of the concept of this fixed route where the buses are following the route and going to every stop, whether there are people there or not. And in real time, we are finding what is the best way for this fleet of buses to address the demand. So the buses are going on these optimized journeys between bus stops. And by doing this, we've been able to cover much larger areas with fewer vehicles, because unlike fixed routes where there's a fixed cost every time the bus has to go to a bus stop to service, whether there's someone there or not, from our perspective, the bus only needs to go when there is someone or there is a need to go there. So you can cover a much larger area with fewer vehicles. We can make the bus service more productive than it is, especially in these less dense areas. And more importantly, for the riders, we can eliminate transfers. So in all the cities that we work in, people can take one bus from any stop in the city without having to transfer. And we found that's really helped increase the number of people who want to use buses, because it's reduced their ride times, it's reduced their wait times, and it's also made it a lot more safe and accessible for people to use transit service without having to change and wait for another bus to come by, and they just get on one bus and go from one place to another. So really how our system works is we're first and foremost capturing the demand. So the origin and destination of where people are going. And we do this in a number of ways. The most common way is we have a white labeled application that the city downloads. So we work with the city, it's white labeled. The users would download this application and they say, I'm going from this bus stop to another bus stop. They tell us what time they either need to be there. So if I need to be at work for 9 a.m., I provide that information, that schedule. Or if I need to be picked up by a certain time, I give that information. Or I can also ask as soon as possible, and the system will tell me when the next bus is coming that can pick me up. But being public transit also, there's an equitable aspect of it, and not everyone has access to smartphones. So to address that market, we also have the ability to set bus stops to be fixed at certain times of the day. So you can set a bus stop to be fixed. For example, if a shift ends at a certain time of the day, the bus stop can be fixed, and we have the ability for someone to board the bus and tell the bus driver where they're going to, which stop, and the bus driver can quickly input that information. And then what we're doing now is we're capturing all of the origin and destination of where people are going. So if you think about public transit, generally it's quite difficult to get the origin and destination. You might get on a bus, they might have a bus counter in a bus which counts the passengers, but really getting that origin destination pair is not generally available in public transit. So we're capturing that information. And then what our system is doing is we're looking at all the buses in the service area. What's the different capacities of all the buses, where each of the people are going to, what time they need to get to a bus stop for or be picked up by, how long they've been in the vehicle for, if they have any mobility constraints. And we're calculating all the different permutations and guiding the buses one bus stop at a time between the bus stops. So the rider then knows, and they're dropped off at the stop, and they're notified when their stop is coming up. So that's generally how the system works. We also have the ability to integrate with fixed routes. So at times it makes sense in cities. Fixed routes work really well in dense areas, or if you have commuter lines. So through our system, we can integrate with the fixed routes, and we can drop you off at the time a fixed route service is coming. So in essence, just through technology, you can create a regional transportation system. So if the GO train is arriving at a stop at a certain time, we can make sure that the bus drops you off to align with that schedule. And as a rider, you have a seamless trip from one point to another point. So when we look at the numbers, really public transit is all about making it sustainable. And how do you make it sustainable? It's really how many people can you get in a vehicle per hour? That's the bottom line for public transit. So if we look at transit systems across North America, New York City is a very dense city. They have a very productive transit system. They do about 38 rides per hour on a vehicle, and the cost to the city to do that is about $3.60 per ride. Now, if we look at some of the other types of on-demand services. So there's certain on-demand services which are similar to sort of Uber pools, which is first and last mile, or microtransit type services, which are generally smaller vans where they have smaller zones where people are going from point A to sort of first and last mile. Those generally move about 3 to 5 riders. The most productive one we've seen has been 6 riders per hour, and the cost to the city is usually about $21 per trip. In the first city we started working in Belleville, Ontario, we started with their late night service, and that service was running from 9 to midnight, and usually in transit, that's the most unproductive time of the day. They were running at around 6 riders per service hour when we started working with them. And we were able to get them to 30 riders per service hour. So close to numbers of New York City for a late night service. And really the reason that we found out, the biggest reason for that was this convenience and flexibility. What we found is it opened up a lot of opportunities. U of T did a study on City of Belleville service, and they found about 70% of people who were using the service now were using it to access jobs, where a lot of times they didn't have access to those jobs before. And the ability to get anywhere in the city on one bus was really a big driver of that factor. So when we look at COVID, what COVID's really had a big effect on public transit. It's reduced public transit ridership by 60 to 80%. But when we think about it, we think it just accelerated trends which were already happening. You know, prior to COVID, we were already moving to a bit of a distributed workforce. What COVID has done is accelerated. Everybody's now working from home. We think that those trends, some of those trends are going to linger. They're going to stay. We think people's movement is not going to be as consistent. People may go back to work, but it won't be as regular. There'll probably might go down 2 or 3 days a week as opposed to every day a week going to work. So those commuting trends are all going to change. And really the ability to plan in real time based on what the demand is going to become more and more important for cities to make public transit sustainable. But it's not just COVID. I think urbanization has been a big change which is happening, and it's transforming cities. But urbanization is not we're moving upwards, we're actually moving outwards, and it's sprawl. People are, demographics is changing. We're getting a lot of aging populations, and aging populations need help in where they need to go and how they can travel around. There's a big movement on equity and social inequality, and being able to access jobs and employment is very important to that. Climate change is a big factor that we need to really look at. And if we really want to get people to move out of single occupancy vehicles, we have to think of really improving their other options, because if their options are not good, it's difficult to drive certain behavior if you don't give people better options. So if we look at some of the results in the cities that we're working in, the key aspect of it is really driven by those two factors: the ability to cover an entire city in one zone so that people can get anywhere in that city on one bus. And that's really driven our ability to increase ridership because of that convenience, that reduction in wait time, the reduction in time that people need to spend on the bus. That's been the big driver of the value that we've provided to cities. But on the other side, it's also been the ability to cover much larger areas with fewer vehicles and to right-size the fleets in terms of planning. Example is city of Stratford, which is a smaller city. They were running a fixed route transit service with 10 buses to cover the entire city. We've been able to show that we can do that with 2 to 4 buses based on the demand. Still covering every stop in the city, so covering 262 stops in the city. That when you're planning that with fixed route service, it takes 10 buses, so making that service much more efficient. And Yeah, at the end of the day, we believe public transit is for the public good, and it is the central part of mobility for cities. There's lots of different mobilities in cities, but especially in some of the cities which we work in, which are tier two and tier three cities, where bus transportation is the main means of how people get around the cities. So we stole a quote from the mayor of previous mayor of Pagoda, but it's very important for us that we use it. A developed country is not one where the poor have cars; it's where the rich ride public transit, and it's something that is we believe a lot in. It's really important for social impact. Giving people equal and convenient access to jobs, to education, to healthcare, to social networks. Public transit is key for providing that. And from an environmental perspective, there's a massive impact on getting more people out of single occupancy vehicles and getting onto vehicles where they can be shared their movement of how they get around. There is a really big GHG reduction that is possible by doing this, and we've been able to show that in the cities that we've worked in. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of background about what we're doing. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your time and for giving me the opportunity to share the work we're doing.